So today we are going to be talking about the circulatory and respiratory systems. We're specifically going to try to answer the question, how do we get the reactants of cellular respiration, nutrients like sugars and oxygen, into our cells? So our objective today is really going to be to understand enough about the circulatory system that we can trace a path from where nutrients enter into our body to where it's used in our body, namely our muscle cells, our brain cells, and understand the flow of blood and nutrients through our body, through the pathways of the circulatory system. So we talked a little bit the other day about some of the major parts of the circulatory system, and we're going to focus again on this theme, how to structure, meet, function. Today, we're going to be just thinking overall. The major structures of the circulatory system include blood vessels, and the heart. And the overall function of these three structures, they work together to move food, gases, blood cells, waste, hormones, enzymes, and fluids throughout the body. So we're kind of taking that comprehensive view. Over the next couple of days, we'll break down and really get a good look at blood. We'll be able to dissect a heart and see really what are those structures, how do they meet function. But today, our goal is to look at the system as a whole, and to really look at the flow through that system. So here is a schematic of the circulatory system. You can see that there are sections of the circulatory system where they connect to organs. And then the circulatory system itself has places where there's these nets of vessels, capillary nets. And these are the places. Here would be a lung. Up here would be your brain. Down here would be the liver region, digestive organs, the lower legs and the lower parts of your body. And this overall system of circuits, system of blood vessels, capillary nets, connects the organs of exchange with the body cells. So that term, organs of exchange, is one we're going to be focusing on in today and in the next couple of days as well. And an organ of exchange is a place where the fluids, the gases, the nutrients, the waste enter or exit the circulatory system. So we're going to focus our first organ of exchange on the small intestine. So here is a bigger version of the small intestine. You can see the tube of the small intestine, and if we sort of peel away some of the layers, you see in here is the place where food would be broken down by all sorts of enzymes. Remember, sucrase, pancreatic amylase, lipase. Those enzymes are all working to digest your macromolecules in this tube. And then once you move to the middle of the small intestine, the wall of the small intestine becomes all folded. And we call these folds villi. And these villi really increase the surface area through which food can be absorbed. So they look like little finger-like projections, and if we magnify them even further and we just look at one villi, okay, so here's this big single villi. Inside of each villi is a network of blood vessels. These small capillary vessels are the entry point where food enters into the circulatory system. So you can see there's also this other vessel here called a lacteal. And this is the place where fats are going to enter into first the lymph system and eventually the blood system. So if we take a moment, let's take a moment to go back to here and write down this question. What enters the circulatory system through the small intestine? So after you've copied down that question, I'm going to shift slides, and I want you to pause the video here and be able to identify this molecule below, as well as all of the names and ways that we refer to this molecule. So hopefully you've identified this molecule as glucose. Glucose is the major molecule that provides energy for the body. We also call it a carbohydrate. You may have written down the name of this molecule as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbon molecule, C6H12O6. You may have noted that it's a hexagon or a hexose sugar. You may have written it down by its name, glucose. You may have called it a monosaccharide, or even more general, carbohydrate. But hopefully you, at this point, will recognize this molecule as the molecule that provides energy for your body. And this is the major molecule that needs to enter through your small intestine into your circulatory system. So, here is, again, when we digest all of our food, the proteins, the carbs, nucleic acids, you see them here. They get absorbed through the lining of the small intestine. They pass right through the tube. These cells are making up the tube of your small intestine. They pass through that tube and out to the other side through the capillary cells. And then here would be a tube that would be represented as your capillary. So if you look at this, a note on structure and function, the thickness of the cells that make up the small intestine versus the thickness of the cells that make up capillaries. Capillaries are really thin tubes made out of really thin cells, so materials can pass in and out of the capillary tubes so easily. This is not a focus, but I want to mention, we've talked before that lipids are nonpolar. They can't be directly absorbed into the bloodstream. So when you have fats in your small intestine, they get broken down into fatty acids. As they move through the small intestine, they begin the process of being packaged by chylomicrons, and they move into that lacteal we talked about. They move into a lymphatic capillary, and from there, they're carried to the liver where they're packaged in HDLs and LDLs and get ready for transport. The last thing I want to talk about on this slide is the idea that all the nutrients entering into the bloodstream, they're entering in the small intestine. That's where there's a high concentration of nutrients. Your small intestine is just holding your last meal. And as it moves into the circulatory system, it's moving to the areas where food is needed. So it's moving from areas of high concentration to low concentration. It's doing this process called diffusion. So that's not important for us to think about today, but we're going to spend a whole unit talking about diffusion after the break. So we've now gotten food into the circulatory system. You see over here in this schematic, here is the digestive tract. There's this series of capillaries surrounding the digestive tract. It's actually called the mesentery. And these blood vessels will be taking in sugars, that's the one we're interested in, but also proteins, nucleic acids, and then moving them through the circulatory system. Our objective today was to trace the flow of these nutrients through the circulatory system. So we want to know, where do the nutrients go now? We also want to have a sense of what else needs to circulate through the body and which organs are involved in that. So as we take a minute to look at this schematic, you have a copy of the schematic in your folders. After today's activity, I would suggest you cut out this schematic and tape it right into a page in your notebook. And then as you're taking notes, as you're studying, you can see how to answer each of these questions. As we're finishing up our talk, you may copy down these 3 questions. These are the 3 things you want to know from here. Where do nutrients go now? After nutrients enter the circulatory system through the digestive tract, through the small intestine, where is the flow going? You can see here that the first stop is the liver. And that's important for the fats, of course, because the liver is where they get packaged into HDL. And then coming out the other side of the liver, out the hepatic vein, You have HDLs, maybe some LDLs. You still have sugars. You still have nucleic acids, amino acids. These are all traveling now. And they're traveling in one direction. You notice that the circulatory system has all these arrows. So when blood moves out of the liver, the first place it's going to go, or the next place it's going to go, is probably to the heart. It's going to enter into the right side of the heart, move to the lower part of the heart, and it's going to be pumped out to your lungs. This is our next organ of exchange. When the blood is pumped up into your lungs, the first thing that's going to happen is the blood is going to drop off waste. It's going to drop off CO2. So the CO2 is going to return into the lung tissue and then eventually be exhaled. At the same time, while your CO2 is leaving the system, oxygen, which had been inhaled, is taking the place of where the CO2 was on a hemoglobin molecule and is taking the place of CO2 inside the plasma of the blood and is like filling up. So now oxygen is entering in the blood. You notice on a lot of these pictures the unoxygenated blood is represented in blue, and once oxygen fills up the blood, it's represented in a red color. I will note that you don't have blue blood in your veins, but that's a different discussion that we might discuss in class. So we have lungs, which are organs that oxygen and waste are exchanged. The flow of nutrients is coming from the digestive system. Moving through the liver, moving through the heart into the lungs. At this point, it's picking up oxygen. Then the blood is returning from the lungs to the heart, and then the left side of the heart is going to pump that blood up to the arms and head, out to the rest of the body, down to the kidneys where waste is removed and urine is formed, down to the legs so you can walk and run. And then it's going to complete that loop. You see that the circulatory system in humans is a closed loop. At no point should blood ever be leaving these vessels. We know that in these thin capillary regions, materials can exchange, sugar can leave, water can leave, carbon dioxide can leave, food can enter in, waste, broken down food can be removed, but the system is closed. It's a closed system of vessels. So as we look at the general functions of vessels here in this schematic, we can look at the arteries. Arteries in general are, in most pictures of the circulatory system, are represented in red, and their job is to move blood away from the heart. Okay, so you can see all of the red vessels are moving away from the heart until you get to some sort of a capillary bed. Capillaries are where exchange of gases is taking place, exchange of nutrients is taking place. In this schematic, this is probably digestive system down here, kidneys down here. So we're adding sugars in, removing wastes, and at the same time, the cells of these organs are taking in oxygen and putting in CO2, and then that CO2 is being brought back to the heart. So you can see that the veins are generally, they're usually colored blue, and their job is to return waste, return food, return blood back to the heart. We'll take a minute to think about the names of some of these vessels. Some of them you might have heard of before. Maybe you've heard of the aorta. Maybe you've heard of the jugular vein. These are the names of some of the major vessels that work in your body, and you're going to have an opportunity today to really look at what does the coronary vein connect to? What does the aorta connect to? Where is the vena cava? Which one of these is an artery and which one of them is a vein? They're all considered blood vessels. Some of them are moving blood away from the heart, some of them are moving blood back to the heart. You'll also notice that a lot of times areas of the hospital are named after the vessels here, as opposed to the lung department in a hospital. You might be on the floor with the pulmonary patients, or if you are having some kidney problems, there's not really the kidney doctor, but a renal specialist. I mentioned before that the digestive veins, arteries, capillaries are called the mesentery or the mesenteric vessels. There's a major bone in your leg called the femur. Did you know that there are blood vessels that feed your bones? So the femoral artery feeds your bones in your legs, as well as the muscles surrounding your femur, your hamstring, your quads. So, last thing we're going to talk about today, before we get to our project, is the chambers of the heart. You can see here, strangely, this is labeled the right side of the heart, even though it's the left side of your screen. What you want to think of when you're looking at a heart is that this is the patient. So you, as the doctor, are facing the patient, and as the patient is laying on the table, this is the right side of the patient's heart. This is the left side of the patient's heart. So the left side of the patient's heart is on your right side if you are looking down at the heart, if you're the doctor doing the surgery. And that's how we anatomically label the heart. The heart has 4 major chambers. Maybe you've heard of them before. You have a right atrium, this right opening area, a right ventricle. You can notice that the walls of the ventricles are a little bit thicker. You have a left atrium and a left ventricle. And our last slide today is taking a look at how blood moves through these chambers. So you can see that a major vein is bringing blood back from the body to the heart. Enters in the right atrium, goes to the right ventricle. At that point, the right ventricle pumps blood out to the lungs. The lungs are where the blood is filled up with oxygen. Now this oxygenated blood returns to the left atrium, the left ventricle, and out to the body. So basically, the circulatory system in humans is a double set of loops. There is the pulmonary loop, one closed circle, one closed circuit that brings blood from the heart to the lungs. And there is the body circuit that brings blood from the heart to the body, back to the heart again. So that's your primer on the circulatory system. Hopefully enough background information for you guys to focus on tracing the flow of nutrients and blood through the circulatory pathways. Our activity today is a mapping activity. So we are going to be like Google Maps and try to map the circulatory system. You're going to get a large piece of paper, and there are some handouts in your folders, and you're going to try to connect the major structures, the major buildings of your city to each other using the correct vessels. And we'll be doing some labeling. The goal is not necessarily to copy the schematic that we gave you. So the goal is not necessarily to trace this pattern or this pattern, but to maybe make something that looks like this, representing the different parts of the circulatory system and carrying out an analogy where you're taking a look at what are the major vessels, what are the major stops, what are some of the narrower, more minor vessels. Maybe they get to the local roads all the way to your single house. So in our analogy today, the interstates would be serious main veins and arteries. Major stops might be these organs of exchange, small intestine, kidneys, lungs. Main streets, maybe some of the lesser arteries, Local roads might be represented by capillaries, capillary beds, really thin, narrow roads, maybe one-way streets. And then your house would be a single cell, right? So if you think about the town of Needham, your individual house is one small piece of the whole town. Not quite as important as the high school or city hall, just a kind of smaller area. So as you keep these parts of a map in mind, we're going to try to apply these parts of a map to the circulatory system and meet our objective of tracing the flow of nutrients through the circulatory system today.